Welcome back to Society Case Files. My name is Robert, and today I'm going to talk about Mafia: The Old Country. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Otherwise, I'm going to dive right in. Mafia: The Old Country is pretty much an adventure game. It's story-driven, there's tons of cutscenes, and while there are a few segments of open-world exploration to find collectibles and stuff, that's really not the point. That's not what the developers were out for here, and that's pretty much true of the other Mafia games as well. I've played all of them except for the third one. That means I've tried the definitive edition and the original and so on. And I can say that it's a fairly predictable romp by and large, not just in the story elements themselves, but in how they push the gameplay. In Mafia: The Old Country, you've got some melee combat where you basically are going to do these knife fights. And before you even start the tutorial, you kind of know where it's going. You've got a light attack, you've got a heavier attack, you've got parries that you can use to do a counter, and then, of course, there's heavy attacks you simply can't parry, so you have to dodge them. It's right up there in the normal melee handbook, and that's pretty much the truth of the gameplay behind this. Cover shooter, for the most part, lots of I don't necessarily want to call it bad gunplay, but it's okay gunplay. The game itself, all of the content that is a quote-unquote game, is pretty much there to get you through the story beats, to move you from one part to the next. And the reason this is primarily bad is that if you've played any adventure games before, you kind of know exactly what's going to happen here. This is not the most surprising title I've ever seen. And I suppose that the primary fault is the fact that if you have played anything, even all the way back to like Assassin's Creed 2, you sort of have a feel about what's going to occur from one moment to the next. As you meet the characters, you kind of know what point they play in this overdone story. And I'm not going to coat that. It is kind of overdone. Now, it should also be known that they have done this in a way that makes it absolutely beautiful. I think the graphics are great, especially the facial expressions. They do a fantastic job of conveying the emotions of what's going on. And however they did it, they really did spend some time and made it very high quality. I think it's a little bit of a shame that it was wasted on a game that is just so predictable. If you haven't played a game like this before, I would say that this is a must-play game. I think you'd have a great time. But it should be known that you're going to be sitting through quite a few cutscenes. There's a lot of drive and talks. You've seen that in plenty of games. Lots of moments where you just got to listen to what's going on and, do some mundane stuff, moving crates or whatever. And there's plenty of action. But again, it does come down to if you have played games like this before, you're not really going to get anything fresh or new out of Mafia: The Old Country. It's a little too cliche, in my opinion. And what makes that suffer is primarily gamers who have a lot of experience are going to not be as impressed. People who are a little bit newer to the genre, who don't want to go back and play some clunky titles that lack quality of life, they're going to be the ones that this is aimed for. Obviously, they want to aim it for everybody, but considering that I was finding myself predicting most of the things that might happen, it was harder for me to care about it all around. And the gameplay wasn't significantly interesting enough to be the reason to come back. So if it's only story you're interested in and you feel like you're predicting it all and you've read ahead or you've seen some spoilers, then yeah, you might not really find yourself wanting to spend $50 on this title. Now, that said, it isn't a full-price game. They kind of recognize that, and they recognize that it's not the longest title out there. You could probably finish it in between 15 and 17 hours, depending on how good you do. And if you put it on like a harder difficulty and die over and over again or get frustrated, you might squeeze out a little more time. But all around, you're not going to experience, this isn't 200 hours of gameplay like you'd see in Red Dead Redemption or something. There's no random adventures out in the wilderness. There's no side quests. There's not really bandit camps to go and take care of or anything like that. There's not really experience. There's a shop within the game that you can buy upgrades to your gear, but they're not all that important unless you play it on hard difficulty, in which case you're going to need to maximize a few things. But on normal, the gameplay is just honestly, it's kind of a distraction to get from one beat to the next. I find that a little disappointing. There's some non-skippable stealth scenes that are a little frustrating. They're not too terrible. It did cause me a little bit of consternation here and there. But, when I look over the reviews and I watched a few videos, I kind of want to talk more about those. Some of the reviews complain that the game has terrible optimization, but I've seen some videos where people say that's not entirely true. Then I see what settings they put it on, and I'm like, maybe, maybe it is true. I didn't experience any graphics glitches. I didn't experience any sort of performance hit or anything like that, to be honest. I thought it worked very well. I'm not saying that it is well optimized, and I do believe those reviews that suggested that there are problems with it. So that's something to keep in mind if you have a middling computer or you're concerned that maybe your machine is not up to the system requirements they have. You might think twice about trying it, or do it on Steam so that you can return it if it does turn out to be bad. These reviews are probably the majority of the bad, quote unquote, bad reviews, are people complaining about how it runs. There are a few that are calling it boring and stuff, but when you look at the amount of time they've played, it's like, you haven't really even gotten out of the tutorial. And I'll admit the tutorial's a little bit slow. Honestly, it's a slow burn. I mean, there's a lot of cutscenes to establish what's happening. Do I think that's absolutely necessary? Probably not. I mean, we've probably all seen a Mafia movie or two. Most people who care about this have probably at least heard about The Godfather or The Godfather 2. I don't know. Maybe not. But it does feel like an unnecessary origin story. And a lot of the game does have that sense of, this just feels so familiar. That's probably the biggest sin, is the sheer amount of familiarity of just having done this before. But you could experience some fantastic graphics in a game that does not cost, $70. And these days, everybody's trying to squeeze as much as they can. And so the fact that they aren't in this title is really cool. You're going to notice that I don't include a lot of gameplay from later on after a certain point. And that's primarily because, again, this game is all about the story. So showing off too much of what happens will absolutely spoil things for you. Since that's the only reason to play this game, I want to avoid spoilers at all costs. I'm not going to go into why I think it's cliche, because again, if you haven't experienced these stories and you haven't gone through this kind of thing before, then it could be a big surprise for you. Or maybe you're cool with the familiarity. I am not going to give that a hard time at all. That's perfectly fine. There's a reason that there's like 300 seasons of Law and Order. Sometimes those are like comfort food for entertainment. And I would say that Mafia: The Old Country could very well be a comfort food storyline. It's not going to challenge you overly much. It might be a little emotional here and there. It just depends on how much you can invest in these characters. But by and large, I would recommend Mafia: The Old Country at a discount. And we know for a fact that it will be fairly inexpensive, probably within 6 months. I mean, maybe even sooner. It kind of just depends on how much those optimization issues cause people to abandon it or refund it. Then we'll see them do some patching, try to fix up some of the problems, and then release it for $10 cheaper or 20% cheaper, whatever. I'll say this, the developers did comment quite a few times on people's bad reviews, offering them some pretty canned responses, to be honest, basically telling them, hey, if you're experiencing issues with the game, go ahead and reach out to us here and we'll work one-on-one with you and that kind of thing. And people who called it out for being boring or cliche or anything like that, they'd look at their time and they'd say, hey, it looks like you've got quite a bit of time left in this game and there's plenty of action to come, so we look forward to hearing how you feel about it at the end. I mean, if they weren't all pretty much exactly the same as that, basically copy and paste, I kind of would have given them a little bit more, some props for reaching out like that. But on the other hand, they're pretty much just trying to offset the negative reviews and show the people who are reading them that they're paying attention. I think it's kind of backfiring since, like I said, it is copy and paste. But, I think that in some ways, if you're a fan of the Mafia games, you're not really listening to randos complain about it. You're just playing it. And maybe you've already beaten it and moved on. As far as the way games work these days, with live service titles coming out and people constantly begging for money through freaking microtransactions and everything else, I gotta be honest, this kind of gaming could be a breath of fresh air. It's a single player title with a story. I'm not gonna say that that's terrible. Now, while I have said that you should probably wait for a sale, if you are gagging for that kind of thing and you haven't gotten a chance to experience anything like that for a while, then this is definitely for you. Don't wait. It's a good price. If you don't like it in the first 2 hours, you can refund it through Steam. Definitely give it a shot. I played it with a controller and I found it to be a lot easier than a mouse and keyboard, though with the shooting and stuff, maybe the precision of a mouse might help you. I don't know. It does have a sense that maybe it was made for console and they threw it on the PC for just a afterthought, especially if the optimization problems are all 100% true, then that's absolutely the case. But anyway, and regardless, that's my feeling about Mafia: The Old Country. Have you played it? What did you think of it? Is this a game that you're desperate for? Do you think that they've kind of done this to death? Let me know in the comments. We'll talk about it. This is Robert with Society Case Files, signing off.